there are issues that I tiptoe around. I've had requests for this, and I've had a couple of different requests. I had a request to look at Montreal's um, original six Stanley Cups and the fact that they had exclusive right to French players, and the idea that that didn't cause them to be the best team in the league. That it was scouting and coaching and everything was really well done in Montreal, and it's true. Montreal's dominance and all those Stanley Cups they won aren't entirely because they had rights to all the players out of Quebec. I will say this: there were a lot of really good players out of Quebec they had the first shot at, but Guy Lafleur, that was California screwing up, and the team they put together in the 70s had nothing to do with favoritism towards Montreal. It was just really good coaching, scouting, and just fantastic development of everything. The one thing, though, is then the question was asked to me about the influence of the French question on Montreal. So the influence of the French and the players and this is a fascinating topic, and it's tough for me because I'm not from Quebec. I haven't been to Quebec. I've lived in Ontario, I've lived in Newfoundland, I've lived in Saskatchewan, and I say Saskatchewan because that's what I called it when I was a little kid. I didn't say Saskatchewan, I said I lived in Regina, Saskatchewan. Anyways, now I live in BC. So, other than my other memories from when I was a little kid, I don't really much to go on for the rest of the country. So I try not to speak for the rest of the country, and especially since 80% of Quebec identifies as French speaking. 4 million don't speak English at all. So I looked at Montreal's most recent GMs, whether it's Bergevin, Gauthier, Gainey, Savard, Oul, or Savard. And I had to go back and go, wait, Savard twice? No, Serge Savard and Andre Savard. They have to be able to speak French. Or, Bob Gainey was the Montreal Canadiens in the 80s. I don't think it would have mattered if he spoke French or not. He is a Montreal Canadian through and through. I know he was a leader in Dallas for a while, but he's still Montreal Canadian. That's why Guy Carbonneau ended up in Dallas, because Bob Gainey. And Guy Carbonneau is just a younger version of exactly what Bob Gainey was. It was kind of weird. And for reference for the young kids out there, Patrice Bergeron right now, that's what Guy Carbonneau was back in the late 80s. That's what Bob Gainey was in the early 80s. They didn't get the prime ice time, and they didn't get that number one role that Bergeron gets in Boston a lot of the times, but they were excellent players. But there's an interesting question to be asked. So Montreal has to have French-speaking coaches and GMs. I've always thought that's weird because best person available. So I thought, all right, let's take a look at their draft record, shall we? I'm pulling out the old guide and record book. This past draft, Ryan Poling, Josh Brook, Yoni Ikonen, Scott Walford, Cale Fleury, Jared Zika, Caden Primo. Not a lot of French guys in there. The draft before, Mikhail Sergachev, Will Bitton, Victor Matei, Casey Stom, Michael Pezzetta, Arvid Henriksen. Draft before that, Noah Juleson, Lucas Vedemo, Matthew Bradley, Simon Bork, and Jeremiah Addison. The only reason I say that is because if Montreal wants to make things work, they have to draft the right French player, and Louis LeBlanc back in 2009, who was drafted 18th overall, wasn't the answer. Nathan Beaulieu at 17, probably not the answer either. But when you're drafting that late in the first round, that's not really the answer anyways. But the weird thing is, I thought, you know what, I'm going to look at this from a different perspective. So Montreal identifies itself as French, and the Montreal media wants people who speak French. I don't know that the fans care that much. I don't know that the 4 million people in Quebec that don't speak French, or Quebec as they'd call it, don't speak French, or don't speak English, I don't think that they would care if Montreal won the Stanley Cup and didn't have a coach that spoke French. I don't think it's that big of an issue there. Go ahead, if you live in Quebec, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below just how important this really is to fans that the coach is able to answer questions in French, because I find it really strange. And then I looked up who are the top scoring career leaders right now who are French born. So Quebec born, not French born, Quebec born. They may have been born in Montreal or in a suburb where they spoke English. They may not have spoke French, but they're Quebec born. Patrice Bergeron leads the way at 725 points. If Bergeron was in Montreal right now, how much better would the team be? Yeah, I know he's injured. Don't be a smartass. If Bergeron was in Montreal, they have that fantastic center they need. They would have so much more than what they have right now. Pominville second with 690 points. Paul Stastny's next with 643. Antoine Vermette 515. He's a decent top bottom six center. David Perron 444. Chris Letang 430. He'd look good on the blue line. Broussard 426. He's another center. Burroughs 407. Vlasic 285. Pretty good blue liner there. Beauchemin 284. So then I thought, all right, well, let's take a look at the youngest players in the league and how many of them are born in Quebec and who they are. Pierre-Luc Dubois, Samuel Girard, Anthony Beauvillier, Thomas Chabot, Anthony Duclair, Sam Morin, Jonathan Drouin, and I've got asterisks next to Drouin because he's a Hab currently, Anthony Mantha, Charles Hudon, also a Hab, Michael Matheson, Charles Paquette, or Cedric Paquette, and Jonathan Huberdeau. I'm not saying that these guys necessarily could have ended up becoming Montreal Canadiens at the draft, because some of these guys were early draft picks and Montreal didn't have a shot at those draft picks. And they had to trade out Sergachev, their draft pick 2 years ago, to get Drouin. So that's kind of a loss. But it's funny to me that they want coaches that speak French and GMs that speak French, and yet the players, a lot of them are European, a lot of them are from other parts of Canada. They're drafting guys out of the States. Carey Price out of Anaheim Lake here. It's a strange. It's strange to me in this. So we can all agree that the Montreal Canadiens need help. You look over here, you got Jonathan Marchessault, Yanni Gourde, Matthew Perreault, and Jason Demers. Those are some of your top point producers per game currently in the league who are born in Quebec. So I guess the thing I'm wondering is, when you're hiring a coach and GM and you've got Marc Bergevin, and I feel bad for Bergevin. I don't know that Bergevin was ready for this job. Any more than I think Pierre Gauthier was necessarily a great GM. I don't think Andre Savard was a great GM. Ray-Jean Houle, Serge Savard was very good. But what you're left with here is you're left with Bob Gainey and Serge Savard, and and even Gainey when he left. There were all kinds of complaints about Gainey and how terrible he was as a GM and all the places he screwed up in Montreal. And for coaches, they go back to Claude Julien, and I've said all year, and I said even at the end of last year, that I didn't know if Claude Julien was the right guy to coach that Montreal team. That the way he coaches hockey, the style he plays, I don't know if it works for what Montreal's trying to do. But he speaks French. And to me, the big thing with Montreal and moving forward from here, and I'll get into their roster and who they have and who they don't, and who they should keep, and does Carey Price make too much money? But to me, this whole French question is huge. I don't have a problem with Montreal necessarily saying, you know what, we need more French in the roster. And the reason why I say that is this reason. I like it when the Vancouver Canucks pick up a kid from BC. Same as Toronto Maple Leafs fans are glad to see a kid from Ontario get picked up. You know why? Because they sometimes, depending on who they are, they may play a little harder for their home team. Montreal has drafted some solid players, and you look at the career of Galchenyuk right now, and there's been some stops and starts. But you ask yourself, if Montreal dedicated itself to saying, you know what, if our manager has to be able to speak the same language as all these people, if our coach needs to be able to do that too, why not get players on the roster to do it and not Louis LeBlanc? And when the next Saku Koivu comes around, don't worry about whether or not the guy can speak French. But to me, the whole Francophone question and the whole Montreal legacy right now, where it is right now, because that's what's important, is it just feels like they're half committed to being French, and that's just to talk to the media, and we'll get a good coach. Maybe you'll be all right. That's why you get Therrien, and then you go to Julien, and then you have Therrien again, and you go to Julien again. And it just feels like you're juggling, and you're not making any steps forward. And I like Claude Julien. He was a coach of the Boston Bruins when they won the Stanley Cup. I have no problem with him. But the fact remains that with where Montreal's at, they need to figure things out. Their roster has holes in it, and it always feels like they bring in guys to patch up the defense, and they bring in some okay guys like Shaw. Shaw's okay. He's fine, I guess. Jordy Ben would have been fine on the blue line as a number 5-6 guy. It just feels like when they bring guys in, they're just spinning their wheels. So you have a team that last year did very, very well, finishes first in their division, goes out in the first round, and this year they're lost. And to me, this is part of it. This is part of it. To me, you can't divorce one from the other. To me, Montreal is the French question. Are you going to be French? Yes. Then don't just worry about the GM and the coach, and figure out how to get some of the best Quebec-born players into your system. Meaning, when you draft, look for the best guys in the QMJHL. If a QMJHL guy isn't a guy you want to draft in the first round, fine. But every round after that, find gems in that league. And there are gems in that league. That's why there's a lot of good players on that list. Are they great? A couple of them are. Marchessault right now and Bergeron would be huge. Adding Brassard to that lineup would be potentially massive. Being able to draft a guy like Beauvillier, Chabot, Duclair, Mantha, anything. Get kids that are born in Quebec. Go for it. I've advocated for years Vancouver should draft more kids from BC for this same reason. Because I think they play harder for their home team. I think when you put on a jersey of a team that you grew up watching and a team you grew up idolizing, and you get to wear that jersey and play in front of those fans and become what you always dreamt of being, you might skate a little bit faster, you might feel a little bit taller, and that wrist shot might be a little bit better than it is when you put on any other jersey. So why just stop at GMs? Why not look back at the Flying Frenchman? Look back on the rosters that Montreal had in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. No, we're not in that same age. And there's a lot of good European players, and you'll never have a French-dominated roster. But I also look at it this way. If it's so important to the fans that you have a coach and a GM who speak the language, then it should be just as important to bring in the players that do so as well. But you know what? Make them the best at what they do. My issue with Bergevin has never been that I don't think Bergevin's any good or they should be fired. My issue's always been, was Bergevin the right guy when he was hired? Or was Bergevin the guy who got hired because he was French? That's the question I've always kind of had in the back of my mind. Is he the guy that came forward with the best resume who happened to be French? Or was he the best guy for the job? But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Montreal fans, let me know how you feel about this. As I said, I got a couple of requests to do something Montreal related. And for me, this is where my comfort is. Because I don't have, I speak a little bit of French. It's really not going to help unless we're going to talk about whether or not I have to go to the bathroom, whether or not I'm hungry, and just everyday, how's the weather kind of crap. So I thought I'd take a look at it and say, well, who are the best young French players in the league and how many of them are Montreal? And when you look, and you don't see very many Montreal Canadiens there, you don't see asterisks next to very many names, you got to ask yourself, what are they doing? And I'll go back to the Vancouver thing. It's frustrating when you see a kid locally that's really good, and the team kind of goes, and they draft somebody else. A couple years ago when Vancouver didn't draft Ty Ronning and the Rangers drafted him instead, I was just floored. I was absolutely floored that he went in the 7th round to New York. And Ty Ronning had 61 goals for the Vancouver Giants this year. You know, yes, he's an overager, but he's also signed his entry-level contract with the Rangers. And I'm kind of hoping he does really, really well. Because he was born and raised to be a Canuck. His dad's Cliff Ronning. And Vancouver decided to go with somebody who likely never plays, rather than Ty Ronning, who, yeah, maybe Ronning never plays. But he's kind of born to be a Canuck, isn't he? Born and raised in Vancouver, and his dad was a Canuck. His dad never wanted to leave Vancouver. He just wanted money, and Vancouver said, "We're not giving you money. Hell with you." It's the only reason he left. Otherwise, he would have been a Canuck for life. So, how many kids get drafted that should be Quebec-born Montreal Canadiens, and they end up getting drafted by somebody else? So, there's another question for you guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, and thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.